It's very cool.
Hello. I don't know who just said hi to me, but hello. So feel free to have your screens on if you want. We will be recording this for our archive, just so you know. You can mute yourself if you're not talking, but we will invite you to ask questions later when you can unmute yourself and we can hear directly from you. You can also use the chat during this and we'll be keeping an eye on that. I also want to alert people if they're interested in closed captioning, they can either turn that on or off depending on your preference. At the bottom, you should have a closed captioning button on your kind of bottom bar. So I guess the first thing is, if you're here if you are here hoping to hear from Aida Lizalde, you are in the right spot. If that's not why you're here, we invite you to stay here with us. But we understand if you are looking for something else. Even though we are all virtual and in different places, I always try to start with a land acknowledgement anchored in where Sierra Nevada University is, which is in Incline Village, Nevada. And we are on Washoe land. The Washoe people have lived, thrived, and stewarded this land long before the college was here and continues to do so to this day. We acknowledge the Washoe people for their care of this land, and we pay our respects to the elders, both past and present. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ann Ziyarshka. I use the pronouns they, them, and I'm the gallery director at Sierra Nevada University. And I'm going to talk really briefly here, do some introductions, and then I'm going to hand it over because I know you didn't all come to hear from me. I already said we'll be doing questions at the end, so stick around for that. For those of you who aren't familiar with Sierra Nevada University, because I see some unfamiliar names in the participants list, which is awesome. Welcome, hello. This is being hosted by Sierra Nevada University Fine Arts Gallery Program. We're a small liberal arts college on the North Shore of Lake Tahoe. And we have this amazing fine arts program that has BFAs, as well as we have a low residency MFA and interdisciplinary arts program. If you have any questions about our programming, please feel free to reach out to me. The most important thing though, is we are absolutely thrilled to be hosting Aida's absolutely extraordinary exhibition on campus currently. It's called Fragmentos, and it features the guest artist Tiffany Perch. It's in our garage door gallery, which is in the Holman Arts and Media Center. It's on view through March 26th, obviously socially distant, wearing masks, following all proper precautions. But if you want to stop by and check that out, we're open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We also have images online, which I'll post into the chat later if you can't make it in person. I want to give just a very brief introduction to Aida. She's a multidisciplinary artist and Mexican immigrant living in California. She works with body, ceramics, construction materials, and even food to investigate issues of citizenship, power, heritage, nationality, and other personal and political experiences. Navigating tensions of identity through passive and active roles with materials and actions, and continuously questioning assimilation to the United States as an immigrant is at the core of her practice. She graduated from University of California, Davis in 2018 with a Bachelor of Arts in Studio Arts and a minor in art history. Her work has been exhibited throughout California. I lost my place in her amazing bio. I is currently a member of Access Gallery in Sacramento and has been a recipient of various awards, including the Vermont Studio Center Fellowship, the Young Space Grant, the Crocker Kingsley Award, and the Herb Alpert Scholarship for Emerging Young Artists. I want to also thank Alana Berglund for recommending Aida to us. It's been such an amazing opportunity to work with her. And personally, I feel just so much of art is this direct gift that comes from an artist, and Aida's work is no different. She shares with the audience so much of her identity and her experience in these beautiful and nuanced ways. And with all of that in mind, I'm going to hand it over to Aida and wholeheartedly thank you for being here with us and sharing more about your work and process.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ansa. I hope everyone can hear me well, and I'll do my best to speak slowly and clearly. I do have an accent and it tends to come out mostly when I'm nervous. So Yes, I'm very, very grateful for the space in the gallery to show the work that I've been doing in the last couple of years. And I'm also very grateful for the space to share my thoughts on it and the process and a little more information about it with all of you, which are for the most part a new audience for it. And a very exciting new audience because you're from an art institution. So I can dive a little bit deeper into like what the work was made, what was it processing in my experience, etc. Like Ansa said, I am a multimedia artist and I am a Mexican immigrant and I live in Sacramento, which is Nisenan land. Thank you so much for that land acknowledgement to Ansa. So my family immigrated to the Central Valley of California shortly before the recession of 2007. And I've been navigating my assimilation to the United States in various periods of extreme social and environmental shifts, the recession, and then like the what we call the Trump era, and obviously now with the pandemic. I've navigated the difficulties of the and complexities of the immigration system to obtain legal status, and I've also explored identity through my work as a malleable, geographically and legally dependent concept. So I'm gonna get started with images from the exhibition. So I'm gonna share my screen and I'll just keep talking. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and Ansa will interrupt me if necessary or wait for the end. So here we go. I'll share this. Just one sec. Okay, so this this exhibition is called Fragmentos, and it has two series of artworks that were kind of merged together by a few very specific pieces that kind of like connected them like bridges. It's called Fragmentos because it mostly speaks for the I'm so sorry, I like didn't mean to get out of that. So it speaks for like this fragmentation of identity. Part of the work is speaking specifically about migration, and then the other part is talking about just like other things in my experience. And in my experience, once I was able to travel back to Mexico. This work specifically is one of the more recent works. It was informed by another one that I'll be showing shortly. It's called ID Quilt. And it is actually literally a quilt. I have an image of the whole piece and then one of the process when I was making it in my studio. It is the first completed quilt that I ever make, and it was a very cool process. I'm not an expert sewing like sewer. My sister is really into it, and she got me a really great machine. But yeah, this was I made this quilt after asking various people that I know who are also immigrants to share their photographs with me. And all the people that I asked are people that I know personally and that are either part of my family or my colleagues and who are also artists or people that I went to school with. This is an ongoing project, so if you are an immigrant or if you know anyone that might want to share their photographs with me, please put them in contact with me. But this piece is trying to reflect the process of how your identity changes, like a visual history of what people's identities are as they go through the immigration process. So I am asking specifically for photographs that are of the immigration process. So all the passport style photographs that are used in relationship with legal paperwork, like the deferred action for childhood arrivals, or the application for adjustment of status, or the application for citizenship or for a visa. So these are like various photographs of different people that have gone through different levels of these processes. Some of them come from Beijing, El Salvador, and Mexico. And I was using this format in some of the paperwork that I made last year in Mexico of the format of the quilt as a way to represent like a, like a fragmentation of a lot of different things coming together in one. And of course, I was also referencing the American flag with the colors of the quilt. And I was referencing just the idea of quilts in America. Quilts are definitely a very American thing. They were originally made out of scrap materials. They were like something that was very resourceful, that was kind of something that was made to be gifted to new families coming into communities, which is also something symbolic about it. And then after all, I also wanted to make a quilt because having all these people around me in my community who are also immigrants is also a very comforting and warm thing to me. So I wanted to reflect that a bit with the object that I was creating with it. And like I said, I'm still making more objects that have these images, so feel free to email me if you want to share them as well. Um, I'm moving on to, I'm gonna do a mixture of both photos of the specific artworks and then also installation shoots. This one I wanted to just kind of show you the gallery in general, and then get a close-up on the first artwork that I did that was in the same format as the quilt. This is called Tabla. You can see it on the floor down here. And ID Tabla was the first project that I made that included passport style photographs, but those were all my photographs. Like I said, I immigrated to the United States when I was 15 years old, actually. So through the process, I first came here with a visa and then it expired. And then eventually I became a resident and a citizen. So I did have to navigate the whole process, like from one end to the other one. And I had tons and tons of photographs that I used to apply for various things, including passports, IDs, like matricula consular, which is an ID that's given by the Mexican government to Mexican people that are living abroad. Also just like adjustment of status paperwork, etc. So I use all these photographs and I put them all together in a random organization to kind of like reference the game of loteria, the Mexican game of loteria, which the little squares with the images are called tablas. And I was referencing the loteria because obviously if you're familiar with the immigration system in the United States, a lot of it is based on the lottery system. But also to talk about this idea of how, like, if you're lucky enough and you get all of the paperwork sorted, then you can get the lottery, which would be like the American dream, you know, like you get this like dream of like finally being able to have a job and like basic rights and vote, etc. And I also combined these cyanotype photographs with some ceramic chips that I made to reference the game itself. And eventually I ended up switching the chips for a different version of them that are high fired. These are pictures of the earlier version. And I believe on this one, yeah, you can see the newer version. And these chips are high fired, so the ceramic's a little bit darker now, and now they don't have the inscription of like USA or the abbreviation in Spanish, which is like EUU. But you can see that all of these photographs are mine, and they're all from the process of like some sort of like process of immigration, except for one. And one of them, I can talk a little bit more if we have time later, but one of them was about this alter ego I created in undergrad school that I was just using to do a lot of performance about Mexican identity. So this piece, oh yeah, moving on. So this piece is very, very, very personal. It's called Wedding Dress. And it is actually a white flag that is made out of paper pulp. And the paper pulp was created with white cotton that came from my wedding dress. So the way that I was able to obtain legal residency and then become a citizen of the United States was through marriage. Because I had been here on a visa and then that expired when I was 16 years old and our family overstayed, I was not able to adjust my status otherwise. Like I actually had no path to citizenship. Like there was no way for me to fix my legal situation unless I got married. So there really wasn't one. I would have, because we overstayed, I would have been banned from being in the United States for 10 years if I left and tried to get another visa. And then that put a lot of pressure on me when I was younger to get married, and that's how I obtained my my green card. So it was this is like symbolic in a lot of different ways, because as a feminist, when I was younger, I felt like I didn't want to get married in order to get rights. That seemed like they seemed like a Victorian concept, you know, like you don't have any rights unless you get married. You don't have any value in society unless you like go through this process and get married. So it was like a very difficult choice to make for myself. And in a way, it was like a surrender of my integrity of like having to be self-reliant and get through something on my own. Like I actually had to get help from my partner and go through this legal process. And eventually I wanted to commemorate that with an object that represented some of that struggle that I went through and some of the sacrifices that we had to make in order for me to obtain my status. Because we were really young when we got married. And then this other work, I can take some questions about the other ones here, but this work is similar to the other ones in the way that is speaking about my experience of home, like what is a home. This was we moved so much, like even when I was in Mexico, because we struggled economically, we were moving quite a bit, and then when we moved to the United States, we also, my family moved a lot, because my parents were always like looking for a, like a stable job. But this house was our last house in Mexico, and it's a ranch that is owned by my grandpa. And when I became an immigrant, when I moved here and I was not able to go back to Mexico to visit, I would do this thing where I would go on Google Maps and I would find my home in Mexico and I would just watch it. And it was something very nostalgic and something that it was like a hope to feel connected to a place that I can no longer visit. And like technology was making like us versions of being able to visit. So this photograph of the ranch was something that I created to speak about that, to speak about the kind of like this like fading memory of my last home in Mexico. And it is also a cyanotype, and it's got some contact crayon lines to try to just kind of like reaffirm that memory, speaking about how there is some memory that is fading and it's fragmented, but then I continue to try to reinforce it to feel connected to it. So this is a photograph of the ranch house. It's really large scale. And then it's kind of sad that some of the parts of the image are like not there. Like the inside of the house is something that is just like not, something that I can't quite grasp, because there is definitely a division of my life between like my past and my present that is marked by an actual literal like geographical border. So it was very it's an interesting piece to make, to explore like what is the last home, this idea of home, and how it's like fragmented and almost like faded. Yeah. And then so this is the other, you can kind of see El Rancho, which is the last work that I was mentioning about my home in Mexico back there, how it's installed. And then this is also a photograph of the installation of like this work on paper that's called Escombros. And I think I have another one. This is a photo of an earlier installation of this piece. Every time that it's been installed, there's a slightly different arrangement, and then there's also a few different objects that become part of it or that cease to be part of it. So this was when it was installed at Access Gallery last year. And this work on paper was inspired by being in Mexico City last year. I started being able to travel back to Mexico in 2015, and last year I went there for an artist residency. And when I was there, I was really thinking a lot about this concept of like cyclical time and just time in general. Obviously, during the pandemic, it became an odd concept for everyone because we weren't so attached to our normal work schedules, and because we were facing grief and death. I was exploring this concept of like time in a non-Western construct, and time in a lot of different cultures is more of a cyclical thing, and it's observed cyclically. And I think that in Mexico City is just a great example of this understanding, because it's such an ancient city, and because all the different cultures that have inhabited it kind of mixed together in its architecture and in its debris. When you walk around in Mexico City, you can see all the new constructions going on. You can also see some of the debris that is still being cleared out from the last earthquake, and you can see some of the ruins of the Aztecs that were there before, and you can see like a lot of colonial buildings also mixed in with new, very contemporary architecture, and they're all part of the same environment. So that's a really interesting mashup of cultures. And when you walk around, it doesn't seem that there's any one culture that's really predominant. So I was very interested in this constant construction and destruction of the city. And I created these works out of paper pulp and recycled debris that I found to reflect that. Alongside a few other smaller sculptures. This is doing something very similar, but in a more biographical way. This piece is called Fragmentos #2. And in this work, I also used recycled materials and paper pulp, but I gathered small rocks from different places that were very significant to my upbringing, whether that was like literally my upbringing or my ideological upbringing, as like a Mexican American person. So one of the rocks, this one right here, is from my grandfather's ranch in Zacatecas. Zacatecas is a state, and the capital also has the same name. And that's where a lot of my family from Mexico comes from. That's where, if I did some ancestry research, and most of our ancestors come from Zacatecas. So my grandpa still lives there and has a ranch there. And then they produce garlic and peppers. And I took a rock from his ranch when I went to visit him the last time, and I just kept it around. So I incorporated that into this piece alongside. This piece is a part of the wall on Leon Trotsky's house. So when I went to Mexico City the last time, even though I'd been there a couple of times before, everyone was very insistent that I see Frida Kahlo's home. And I always struggle with this idea of Frida Kahlo because I'm a Mexican artist and I'm a contemporary artist. So I feel like it gets brought up a lot and it gets used as a kind of like a symbol of Mexicanity. And I feel like sometimes it can be a little diluting of the complexity of Mexican artists. So I was kind of just like rolling my eyes. And then I found out that Trotsky actually had a home a few blocks away. So if you ever get the chance to go to Mexico and visit, Trotsky's house was made into a museum of the refugee. And if you're familiar with the history of Mexico, Mexico City has definitely been kind of a mecca for a lot of political refugees, not only from like the world wars, but also for all the political instability that happened in the 60s and the 70s in Latin America. So I think that a lot of cultural icons that I grew up reading were refugees in Mexico. So that was significant for me too. And also there's this in the United States, there's this very strong dislike for kind of like communist and socialist ideology. And that was definitely something different. Although Mexico is a democracy and it's for the most part capitalistic, we don't have such a strong kind of like um, dislike for these ideas of socialism. And I think it's because we're closer to other countries in Latin America that have both been successful and struggled with these different systems. So that was that. I also have a bullfighting stadium rock. The town that I grew up in Mexico is one of the last towns that has a functioning bullfighting stadium, and that's also a very controversial thing. So I wanted to include that. And one of the rocks is from Casa Lu, which is the residency where I was when I was making this work. So in a way, it was trying to like also grab a part of the art world and where I'm situated within the art world and represent that in this biographical piece. I also, when I grew up, my mom was really into science and she had collections of rocks. So it kind of also brought me back to that. Even though these are not like precious gemstones or minerals, I thought they were interesting for that reason. And this piece, I'm sorry for the bad photograph. This is in my studio. It's a pretty recent work and it's not finished yet. These are 3 out of 5 panels called Venuses. And these are actually a project that I did with some high school students from a private high school here in Sacramento that's called Cristo Rey, which is predominantly Latinx and Hispanic and Mexican American high school. And I was invited to come do a workshop with them. And I didn't just want to show them my work. I wanted them to do something that really explored what conceptual work is and kind of show them how the process of making something conceptual is and the art, and also to kind of explore their identity, which are both things that I do in my work. So I asked the students to make a self-portrait, but I gave them a limitation that they can only do 3 gestures, whether that's like squeezing or scratching or biting or like tearing apart. So I gave them a limit of just 3 gestures that they could use to create something that reflected them and their identity. And there were a lot of different ones that were very interesting that they came up with. If you get the chance to see this in person, please take like a really close look, because you can see kind of like a Puerto Rico flag, you can see like a peanut, you can see lots of figures that are like more like human. There's like a butterfly that has kind of like a phallic like like body part coming out of it. So they were all The students really got into it, which was surprising, and they also came up with some really interesting things all together. And they were working with a clay that it's brown when it's raw, and that when it gets put under pressure and fired in the kiln, turns like a much darker brown color. So I also thought that that was interesting because when I went there, there was it was before the pandemic, so the like issues that we were facing in terms of like racial disparity and stuff, like they're always around, but it was before the George Floyd protests and stuff. So I'm hoping that the students will kind of like see a relationship between like their experience and their identity and that of Black folk, and kind of like relate and be empathetic about it. So um, that's why I picked the clay that would turn a little bit darker when it was put through the firing process. And then I'm gonna move on to this. These panels also were a series of works that I made when, actually three of them, one of them you can't really see hanging here because it's behind that green one, but three of them were made in Mexico City when I was working at Casa Lu. And then two of them were made here after I came back. So the ones that were made in Mexico City were very much informed by the newspapers that I was reading down there. When I was in Mexico, I gathered all these newspapers and I flipped through them, and I was looking for how Mexico was representing the United States and how Mexico and the United States were in relationship with each other in the media of Mexico. Because it's something I hadn't really quite explored before. And I was really interested in seeing, like, if I've known and I've been uncomfortable, and also like getting more comfortable with the way that the media portrays like what it's like to be a Mexican person or a Mexican American here in the United States. I'm like quite familiar with that, but I felt like being in Mexico really situated me into a different notion of what my identity was as someone who now lives and is a citizen of the United States. So I wanted to get to know how the media was seeing the United States, and obviously there were lots of photos of Trump, and I try to avoid as much as possible to really put his face on there because it was something that was kind of bothersome to me to do, because I was also just like tired of seeing Trump art for a while. But it was kind of something inevitable about the way that the United States gets portrayed by media in other countries. Like in the recent years, it's just been kind of like Trump's face and what ridiculous things were said by him and tweeted by him, etc. So these panels were incorporating those things, but they were also incorporating paper that I made with local flowers to kind of like reflect the calico American like fabrics that have flower, like, floral images and stuff. And then there was a lot of other paper that I made that was made just from random recycled materials in Mexico. And then there were posters that I appropriated from the streets of Mexico. So it was a mixture of different visual information that I was putting together in a way that I was hoping was less overwhelming than the way that we receive it, by arranging it in this like geometric patterning. And one of the most fun things that I did there was walk around Mexico City and then um, find wheat paste that were kind of coming off of the wall because of the humidity, and then try to like take them off carefully and cut them and transform them and put them into my work. And then I also found some traditional paper making that they do in Mexico that's called papel mate, and it's made out of a root of a plant. So I found some of that paper that gets painted with acrylic with this kind of traditional cultural paintings of what they call alebrijes, like kind of like animals that have different magical kind of like qualities to them, like not like surreal qualities to them. Some of them are actual animals like quails and bunnies and stuff, but some of them are imaginary. And I also grabbed a bunch of those paintings and kind of cut them up and incorporated them into the work to kind of create this new idea and this new image of this like merger of cultures and information and current events that were happening. Um, and then when I came back, I tried to do a couple more pieces that were reflective of my identity in like a slightly different, more minimal way, and I ended up using risographs of some of the photographs that I had from when I was a kid before I came to the United States. So that's what those blue ones are on the left side. They're photos of me when I was in elementary school, like right before about right before my dad came to the United States, because he came before us and then went back and got us back. So those images were like a very forged identity. That was before I really considered myself Mexican. I was just a girl. I was just a person, and then coming to the United States when I was a teenager really shifted that idea of me just being a human being in the world into being all these labels. So it was an interesting thing to juxtapose um, kind of like what I was going through now conceptually, geographically, culturally, to something that was very simple at a time in those photographs. And then on the right side, there's another large piece that has a bunch of dollar bills that have been screen printed, and they also have that photograph. So it's like the dollar. And I made this series of dollar bills to reflect an idea of like, what is my value here as an immigrant? And oftentimes the value of people who are immigrants here is just very tied to their labor and what we contribute. You know, there's always this like, you know, I have a right to be here because I contribute, because I'm a good citizen, because I pay taxes. Like these are the ways that we try to justify our existence here. That, you know, we shouldn't have to justify it. You know, we're here for survival, and we're here for different reasons and circumstances. But money is definitely one of the things that is always like a way to justify being an immigrant and being here. You know, like you're contributing to society, you're contributing with your labor, you're paying your taxes, and these ideas are always very tied to money and commodifying yourself and your labor. So I put my face in these dollar bills, and then I've been using them in a bunch of different various collages. This is the photograph that I was talking about before, and this was from school when I was in elementary school. It was just kind of like one of those photographs that I take to give you like a document with your picture. And then again on this one, I'm using the pattern of the quilts of the triangles, but it's a little more subtle in the background. These are the same. This is one of the works that I did in Mexico, and you can see in the very center the traditional painting that I'm talking about with like that small. I guess it looks like some sort of like creature that has horns in it, and it's blue. You can also see some of the photographs from like the Black Lives Matter movement. And this one is called muros because this was the first piece that I did where I was appropriating work from the muros means walls. So I was kind of making a funny reference of like me appropriating artwork from the walls of Mexico, but then also all the newspapers talking about like the border wall. So it is very kind of like two different types of like what is a wall. And it's also talking about the coronavirus and like just politics and the economy in general. This is a small close-up of that, so you can see some of the newspaper clippings and other references. And some of the paper also that I made with newspapers, and some of the very beautiful pastel colors that I got in the paper were from the egg cartons. In Mexico, when I went to go buy eggs in the store, the egg cartons were always very colorful. Like I never seen any of them here. Like here, they always kind of have like this tamed color, and in Mexico, they're like bright purple and green and orange, and I thought that was really interesting. And I love the color, so I used some of that. The same with this one, the green came from those egg cartons. And this piece is called Following the White Rabbit, Siguiendo el Conejo Blanco, because I was reading some post-colonial theory from a Colombian author, and I'm just blanking on his name right now, but there's a couple of essays about his work that are titled Following the White Rabbit. And it is about like colonization and like white supremacy, and it's also about post-colonial theory in Latin America and how they were dealing with that back in the 80s, and kind of like the academic environment. Oh, and then that's it. I think we're gonna open it up for questions. If you want to see some more of my work, you should feel free to check out my website. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. And I'm also on Instagram, and my Instagram is kind of a mixture of like artwork and also my personal life. So if you're just looking to look at artwork, then definitely check out my website instead. And I do have a newsletter that you can find both on my Instagram and on my website. And I just want to say also, if you get the chance to check out the exhibition in person, there's also some artwork by a guest artist that I invited, Tiffany Pitch. She's from Stockton, and she was very kind to let me display some of her photographs, which depict large piles of rocks that are located along the San Joaquin River. And they're very beautiful, and they have some like hand embroidery to emphasize kind of like the placement, and I thought it looked really beautiful with the rocks that I made in my work. And they kind of talked about, you know, geography and placement and identity. So yeah, thank you, Tiffany, for sharing those with me. And if you get a chance, please check them out. And yeah, thank you so much, Ansa, for inviting me. Yeah, if anyone has any comments or questions, or I can go back to the slides if you want to see anything in particular that you were thinking about. Yeah, I see the chat. I'm not gonna... Oh, another Davis alum. Oh, and someone's asking about Fragmentos too, and if there's a reason why the base rocks are pink. And yeah, like I was saying, that I was getting a lot of the colors just from kind of like the general recycled materials that were in Mexico City. But also, I don't know if you're familiar with Mexico City at all, but there was a rebranding of a lot of their public transportation. And then they started using this really bright pink, like Rosa Mexicano used to be called, and now we call it Chilango Rosa. And we call it that because it's a slang for somebody from Mexico City, is referred to as a chilango, as a slang. Like if you're from Mexico City, people usually call you like a chilango. So then we started calling this specific pink Chilango Rosa. And if you go to Mexico City, it's everywhere. Like the taxis are like this bright pink. If you go to the metro, there's like a couple of metro cards at the beginning that are bright pink, and those are specifically for women. They're supposed to be like safer, so they don't allow men in them. So yeah, they're just like, you know, the metro station signage and a bunch of different things are just like this bright pink. So being down there, I was very like in your face. So I decided to use that after all, as a way to just like show this like Rosa Mexicano, you know.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute and ask, or you can type question into the chat and we can call on you.
Oh, I see some people I know. Thank you, Roma, for coming.
I have a question, since I'm just wondering if there are things about, so in the past number of years, you've been able to go back and forth between, at first you couldn't travel, but then you are now able to travel back and forth between Mexico and America. And I'm wondering if there are things about being in the United States that help you learn about what it means to be Mexican. And then if there are things about when you visit Mexico that help you, or that make clear some of the things about being the United States. I don't know if being in the different places enhances what you know about the complexity of your identity.
Yeah, I think it definitely adds complexity to the identity for sure. And not only to my identity as like an immigrant and a mestiza, but it also about the American identity, because when I first started going back to Mexico, I was very kind of like intimidated by the idea that maybe people there didn't see me as that much Mexican anymore because I'd been away for so long, that they would like call me gringa or anything like that. And that wasn't really the case. And obviously when I'm down there, I get a different perspective of like what other people think of the United States as. So I get a lot of questions about like, you know, where do I live? And then it's kind of like, you know, some things are hard to explain, like, but then I think this it just adds more nuance to it. I feel like it definitely helped me understand that a lot of the Mexican American experience and identity is not the same as the Mexican identity, or the Mexican identities, I would like to say, because it's a different culture. It's like placed in a different geographical space, and it requires different like emphasis, and it has all this nostalgia carried with it, language differences, etc. So it definitely helped me understand that, like, where they come from, where that nostalgia comes from, and where the difference comes from. And I try now not to put things into categories as much as I used to before, and not to be so adamant about what is and isn't being Mexican. And in my work as well, like what represents like being Mexican, and there isn't really one thing. So I was trying to reflect that in some of the work. Yeah. Oh yeah, what is your reason for using cyanotypes? Is one of the questions from Julia Hart. Well, I mean, I think that the first reason was just my influences. I went to UC Davis and I worked pretty closely with Robin Hill. And Robin Hill makes really beautiful cyanotypes. So that was one of my first exposures to what the cyanotype is. But I think that as a photo process, it's very accessible. And it just has such beautiful color that I'm very attracted to. And I do like to work with photography, but I'm not very good at just like the technicalities of darkroom photography. So I think that just cyanotype is something that I feel very much more comfortable with. Yeah, Robin Hill has been one of my mentors when I was in Davis. So, and I really liked her work, and I took a little bit from inspiration from her on the cyanotype work, and also because the photographs that people are giving me are in very personal documents. So I didn't want to ask for the photographs themselves, and I've asked people to scan them. And it was a really easy thing for me to make transparencies out of the scans that they send me and then develop them through the cyanotype process. So it was like a way to have something that is really true to the image, but not the object itself, which is something that I don't want to ask for. Oh, what piece is behind me? Yeah, this was another question by Julia Hart. So this is a new piece I'm working on. It's not finished yet, but it was inspired by this earth artwork that is in Nevada that I recently saw in person. That's called Double Negative by Michael Heiser. And I went there, I think for New Year's, me and my partner Gary, we like took this like road trip on our van, and we were just sleeping in our van, and we got to see a bunch of artwork, including Double Negative. And I had a lot of thoughts about it, about just like that gesture, and like how is it related to colonization and the land, and how do I relate being present in that land. So it's a piece about that, but I'm not gonna say much more about it yet until it's done and I can display it properly. Yeah, but it's also cyanotype.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And again, just thanks for presenting the work. It's really lovely. But yeah, I'm kind of curious, and it's just in terms of this traveling right between countries. And you spoke to this a little bit, but could you speak a little bit more about sort of the importance of belonging to a country and also the importance of not belonging to a country? What you said about, oh, I saw myself as human. Mm-hmm. Right, and then you cross a border, and then suddenly you're defined by these. You realize other people are sort of defining your identity from the outside rather than the inside. So I don't know if you could speak a little bit about both the importance of belonging to a country and the importance of not belonging to a country, in a sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a very interesting struggle. I mean, in my personal experience, when I came to the United States, I didn't know we were gonna stay here, and I didn't know we were gonna incorporate ourselves to belong. And part of the reason was because our visas were temporary, and the reasons why we stayed were like very many. There are very many reasons why we stayed here. A lot of them economic, and I think that that is definitely something that it took a long time to process, because for me it was just like, oh, I'm just here for a while. So I didn't want to belong then. It wasn't really something that I needed to do. What I did need to do though was assimilate enough so that I spoke properly, so people didn't think that I couldn't communicate. Like I didn't want people to think that I was not smart, or that I you know, like didn't have the capacity of like thinking deeply and having complex like thoughts and emotions, because that's obviously something that that one feels when you're learning a new language and you can't completely express yourself in the depth that you can in your mother tongue. And I think it, as time went by, it just became clear that like that I was growing up in another country, that a lot of the things that kind of made me who I am were part of the environment that I was growing up in. You know, like I don't know that I would be such a like strong feminist, for example, if I would have stayed in Mexico, or that I would be an artist for that matter if I would have stayed in Mexico. So there were a lot of things that, you know, and I fell in love here a couple of times, and my sister had a child here, and I think that those things were marking belonging, that it wasn't necessarily something for me, and I know that it is for other immigrants. When they come here, they want to be American and they see this country as kind of like their kind of like ideal of lifestyle. But for me it was like slightly different. I think it really definitely changed when my sister had a daughter, where I was like, okay, like we have roots here, you know, like because I have a twin sister, so like that was also very close. And then after that, and the wanting to legally belong was tied to feeling equal, and it was tied to my rights, you know, like I wanted to get financial aid so that I could go to school because I couldn't afford it otherwise, but I wouldn't have been able to if I didn't become a resident. So there were a lot of different things that I didn't necessarily see as like I want to be an American, but that they were like, I want to be an American, I want to be able to have the same rights as an American because I'm doing the same things that people who are American are doing, like wanting to pursue an education and have a job, and etc. So it was definitely a process, and it's very, personally, I think it's very different than a lot of people that come here when they're older, maybe. You know, I was brought here when I was really young, so it was definitely something I had to learn and get used to. But the more that I learned the history of like the labor rights movement and like like Chicano, like just history in general, the more comfortable I'm been feeling with this idea of like, okay, maybe I'm Mexican American, you know, maybe I do belong here. But it's still a process. I still don't completely feel that.
Thank you.
Courtney, you have a question?
I'm just curious to use images from other immigrants that come in and utilize them in your work. Have you found?
I'm sorry.
Hold on. Can you hear me?
A little bit better now, yeah.
Okay.
Hello?
Oh yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay. We have the Bluetooth on. Okay, let me begin again. Hello, my name is Courtney. Back up. Okay, so you utilize other people's images, other immigrants in your work, and I'm curious to know if you've been able to work with people from different continents, say European immigrants or Asian immigrants. And if so, do you find that any differences or similarities in sort of this attempt to search for identity, you know, coming from, you know, Latin countries versus European or Asian or anything like that?
Yeah, I think that I mean, I work with people that I'm very close to. So I felt really comfortable working with their images because I was already familiar with kind of like their experiences. And their experiences are so wide ranging. I mean, like the experience that someone who came from Beijing versus somebody who came from from El Salvador is just so different, you know, like there's stories in which there's more of like a colonial wound that is associated with your experience, you know, where like there's people that came here just because they were like looking for a better opportunity, and then there's people that came here because they had no choice because their family was getting murdered. And then there's people that came here because there was one person that came here because they fell in love with someone who was in the army, and then they ended up moving back to the United States because their partner was American. And then they made this their home because it was a person that they decided to be with. So it's just so wide ranging, you know, and the process of assimilation is just as wide ranging, because, you know, like I know people who came to the United States, but they already studied a college education somewhere else, and they learned English as another like second language through like their careers. And then I know people that came here when they were 3. And so it's just like it's a very interesting thing to feel. And there are things that we have in common. We have in common that that we feel like we have the right to be here. That's one thing that we have in common. Like, yeah, we should be here. Like, we're good people. There's also like things that are not as positive, you know, like sometimes there's this feeling like you have to be grateful. You know, like you have to be grateful to be here. And you know, you have to not question the systems that exist, or you know, you have, you know, just that kind of stuff. And the legal processes are also different for everybody. I mean, somebody that came here through like a fiance visa versus someone who came here as a refugee, like that's such a different experience, just like navigating the immigration process in the different ways. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everybody for such like interesting questions.
There's a question from Jasmine in the chat, a
Oh, yeah.
couple back.
I'm Jasmine. Okay. When I first visited Mexico again, did it seem jarring, and how did it affect my sense of identity and how I show that in my work? Yeah, that's very interesting. When I first went back to Mexico, I did a series of works in which I photograph all the items that, I mean, I don't think that's on my website, but I have a series of works in which I went back to the home that I grew up in, and I photographed all the items that were there because there were some boxes that were left over, and we hadn't been back there for 10 years. So they were like this 10-year span where, you know, like some of our things got donated and some of them got thrown away, and like they were just like, somehow they were just like these vestiges of things that we owned when we were at the house, and they weren't the most important things. So it was an interesting experience to kind of like go through some of those items and see like, why are these ones the ones that remained? So that was like an interesting experience. I mean, it was also like, you know, when you're little and you imagine like something being humongous, like I remember like thinking like just the house that we lived in was just like so huge, and then it just like size-wise seems so different when I went back. And the most jarring thing for me was the feeling that there was this feeling of like, why don't you just come back? And that's a very strange thing that I feel like a lot of immigrants have. And it's like this kind of like, I call it the Stockholm Syndrome. And I mean, no, it's like a joke. I don't try to make it so negative, but yeah, there's something about the United States that it almost like wants to like make people think that this is like the only place where you can survive, and like, this is like the best country, that the only country that has like, you know, like a standard of living that is like appropriate. And just going back to Mexico really broke some of that kind of like idea that I'd grown up on since I was 15 until I was 25 and was able to go back. And I realized that like, maybe that's not true. You know, maybe other countries are all right. Maybe I don't have to live in the United States. So that's something that was very interesting, like about being an immigrant here and like kind of being brainwashed into thinking this is like the only way you can survive, and then going back to other places and seeing that other people are surviving and struggling and being happy and just thriving and just being people. Is very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, what goes on, Roma has a question, and it's what goes on in my head when I find myself feeling drawn to a material or explore a new material or a new idea. the materials are just kind of like happenstance, I think. Like I just like something and then I want to learn it. I started working with paper pulp because we, during the pandemic, when I was working on my previous job as an educator, we weren't able to do any programming in person anymore. So we were trying to figure out a way to help parents who were now with their children at home that that couldn't go to school and they couldn't get out of the house kind of thing. So we made a series of like tutorials on how people can make art projects with just random stuff that they can find at home. And paper was one of those things. It was just like you can make paper out of random like garbage that you get in the mail. So after making that project for the kids, I just kind of liked it. So I can making paper, and then it just grew into like an actual body of work. So yeah, it just kind of came from me making something randomly and then just being really attracted to the texture and the fact that it was so cheap and that it was everywhere and that I could make something really large scale with it, and just keep exploring what the medium was about. You know, I think there's things about the material that I'm really attracted to. And like, I mean, one of the things about the paper was definitely the texture, but also how accessible it was. So, yeah.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Anything you're holding on your heart? Oh, there we go.
Oh yeah, there are any resources I recommend for learning about paper making process? YouTube, I mean, this there are a bunch of people that make tutorials. I would really recommend YouTube. There's an artist that I follow who makes these really beautiful mold and decals that are very pricey as well, but they have magnets and they're just wonderful. If I can try to find her and give you the information if you want to shoot me an email. But also there's some places that you can learn. There's, if you live in the Bay Area, there's Kala. Kala has a lot of workshops where you can learn paper making. If you live in the Central Valley, there's a place in Stockton that's called Tuliberg Press, and they have a beater, which is like the machine that makes the pulp out of recycled fabric. And they also have paper making workshops. Tuliberg Press. It's a really cool place and they're not very expensive. I think as places are starting to open, there'll be more workshops. So I think that San Francisco Center for the Book also does paper making classes sometimes. If you're interested in a class, and I'm sure Verge Center for the Arts will have one at some point at Myrtle Press, which is the printing facility that's located inside of it in Sacramento. Yeah, and I would just, yeah, if you want to do it from home, just YouTube definitely is one of the places I would just go. I still do a lot of my research about it on there. I do workshops sometimes if you want to hire me. Oh yeah, somebody shared that they have a paper making workshop this summer with Jane Ingram Allen, and that was Sherry Lee O'Connor.
So yeah, that's going to be at Sierra Nevada University. We have a summer workshop program.
Yeah, very cool. Maybe I'll sign up.
Any other questions for Aida? Okay, fantastic. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I think we can wrap it here. Aida, thank you so much for sharing about all of your work. And as a reminder for anyone in the Tahoe area, the exhibition is up through March 26th and can be seen in person. And we'd love to have you see the work in person. It's just absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for sharing, and thank you to everyone for being in attendance. We'd also love to see you on March 10th at our next artist lecture of Rosita Todorova, who's a local Reno artist who has work up in the Tahoe Gallery on campus currently.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.